Hey everyone, Israel is currently in a war against the terror organization Hamas, and we know how hard it can be to keep up with all the news. So if you haven't had the time to stay on top of the latest developments out of Israel, we're here for you. I'm Ladarga Velazi, and this is ILTV's Weekly Review.
U.S. President Donald Trump has touched down in Saudi Arabia, kicking off a multi-country Middle East tour centered on massive weapons deals, strategic investments, and economic diplomacy. Let's take a look.
In Riyadh, Trump kicked off his Middle East tour with a bang as he signed a $142 billion arms deal with Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman, the largest U.S. defense agreement in history. The package includes Patriot missile systems, MQ-9B Reaper drones, artillery, and a range of high-tech military equipment. The defense deal is just one part of a broader $600 billion investment agreement between Saudi Arabia and American companies. The package includes $20 billion for U.S.-based AI data centers, $80 billion in tech partnerships with Google, Oracle, and NVIDIA, a $4.8 billion jet order with Boeing, and a new $5.8 billion manufacturing hub in Michigan. Trump arrived in the kingdom to a VIP reception with a delegation of top U.S. business figures, including Elon Musk, Sam Altman, and executives from BlackRock, all eager to deepen ties with Gulf capital and participate in Saudi Arabia's Vision 2030 initiatives. Trump's agenda includes strengthening military cooperation, expanding American business interests, and countering growing Chinese and Iranian influence in the region. He is also urging Saudi Arabia to join the Abraham Accords, the landmark normalization deals between Israel and Arab states that were initiated during his first term. During his speech in Riyadh, the president also praised U.S.-Saudi ties and slammed the Islamic Republic of Iran.
Our task is to unify against the few agents of chaos and terror that are left and that are holding hostage the dreams of millions and millions of great people. The biggest and most destructive of these forces is the regime in Iran.
Following Saudi Arabia, Trump traveled to Bahrain for a GCC summit and will also travel to the United Arab Emirates and Qatar. He will also meet with several regional leaders, including Palestinian Authority President Mahmoud Abbas, the Lebanese president, and has already met with the Syrian president, marking an unprecedented round of economic-driven diplomacy. Israel, however, is not on the agenda in this trip, raising concerns for many that Trump is making bold regional moves with discussions with Jerusalem. Despite that, the U.S. maintains there is no issue in the Israeli-American relationship.
And now joining us to discuss Trump's Middle East tour and new business deals is Dan Fefferman, a Middle East affairs expert. Dan, thank you so much for joining us. I'd like to start by asking you about Trump's charm offensive in the Gulf states. Obviously, he's focused more on the economic ties and on strengthening U.S.-Gulf relations. How does that strategy impact Israel?
Yeah, I think, we tend to look at things from a purely Israeli-centric perspective, but we need to remember that the U.S. is the global superpower and that all of these things are, at the end of the day, connected. And so when you're somebody like Trump or the Trump administration or any U.S. administration, you should be looking at the broader picture, and that's investment, that's infrastructure, which in order to create win-win situations, and that's what Trump is all about, is creating these win-win pragmatic situations. You need to look at investment, you need to look at interconnectedness, and to achieve all that, you need regional stability. And so there's been a lot of criticism, there's been a lot of worry that this trip isn't Israel-focused. We have to remember, the United States is not, they're the superpower. They're the elephant and we're the mouse in this scenario. And I think overall it's important that the U.S. has a broader regional agenda. It's not always going to be focused about us. And if the U.S. is signing, a $600 billion infrastructure agreement and $140 billion defense deals, that means that the interconnectedness between the biggest superpower in the world, who happens to be our strongest ally, and the new rising superpower of the Middle East, who is a potential ally of ours, is growing. That bodes well for us. And it also means that the Chinese economic and strategic impact on Saudi Arabia lessens because the U.S. is doubling down.
Now, Trump has spoken at least twice now in Riyadh and then at the GCC summit today about the dangers of the Islamic Republic of Iran to the region. He even called on GCC states to enforce sanctions against the regime specifically today. Now, interestingly, there was a report released recently by a hacktivist group, Prana Network, this week that detailed how Qatar has enabled the Islamic regime to evade some of these sanctions on their oil. This is, of course, happening while Trump is accepting a $400 million plane from Qatar, concerning many on the left and right. Is the Trump administration ignoring these ties between Qatar and terrorist activities, albeit in Iran or elsewhere?
I'll be honest, that's always something that baffled me. We're always been aware of Qatar's influence. Qatar essentially buys influence, and it likes to dance in all the weddings. Some people have asked me many times over the last few years, and especially since the current war, whether Qatar's a good guy or a bad guy. And I always say Qatar is the arsonist, the firefighter, and also the journalist reporting about the firefighter and the fire. And Qatar likes to buy influence. It's also coming out that a number of those in Washington are on the Qatar lobbyist payroll. It's never been clear to me why the U.S. doesn't use a lot more pressure. U.S. has its major air base at Al Udeid in Qatar. Qatar essentially receives strategic defense protection. It's a major non-NATO ally of the United States. And so why doesn't the U.S. use its pressure and its presence there to get Qatar to stop backing terrorist groups, to stop backing Muslim Brotherhood groups across the Middle East, to stop using Al Jazeera, its massive media platform, to incite not just against moderates in the Middle East, but against the U.S. and kind of Western civilization itself. It's inciting against the West itself. It's never been clear to me why the U.S. doesn't use its might. It seems like it's all about the carrots and not enough sticks in this scenario.
Well, moving on to Syria, there are reports that Israel has asked the U.S. to reconsider lifting sanctions on Syria due to security concern. How much of a concern is the security issue when it comes to Syria, and do you think that the United States will reconsider?
I'm actually of the opinion that it's Israel that should reconsider here. I think we need to be cautious, and of course we have the border with Syria. We have the long and painful history of Syria. We have the history of a Syria that was essentially colonized by Iran and used it as a proxy base against Israel. And so we do need to exercise caution. Of course, al-Shara, or the former al-Julani, is a former al-Qaeda and ISIS Islamist himself. And so we do need to exercise caution. At the same time, we have here a huge opportunity for a strategic reset with Syria. And I think here the United States, the Saudis, I can imagine the Emiratis are actually involved in this also, have an opportunity in almost one fell swoop in historical terms to buy Syria out of the grasp of Iran and the radical axis and bring it into the Abraham Accords and the moderate axis here. And I think we should be doing two things at once with Syria, and that is offering them massive benefits for joining the Abraham Accords access, but as Trump said in his speech, demanding a lot from them on the security side. And Israel, I think, should be taking definitely a trust but verify approach on this issue.
All right, Dan, we've got less than a minute left, but I wanted to give you a final word about the fact many Israelis and Americans have expressed concern about the Trump administration kind of going around Israel, as you spoke a little bit about at the beginning. Should Israelis or Americans be concerned about this? Is the U.S.-Israel relationship in danger in any way?
I don't think it's in danger. I think we're jumping to conclusion on this. Again, we have to remember the U.S. is the superpower, and we are the small regional power. We are a regional superpower, but they are the global superpower. That said, there is a threat here. There is a danger here that we are being too short-sighted and not looking at potential regional super packages. We're not looking at exactly how the Trump administration is moving. Said otherwise, there could be a big train that's moving ahead, and we're too focused on ourselves in order to see the big picture. And I think we should be much more in line with the Trump administration. Yes, we have our own concerns, but I think we should be doing it in a coordination with them. And sometimes we might need to, they want us to wrap up the war. I'm not going to get into the details of that, but we need to be having a better discussion with them, with the Saudis, with other new regional partners, and looking at the big picture rather than the individual trees in the forest, as we often tend to do here in Israel.
All right. Thank you so much for joining us today, Dan Fefferman. Welcome back to ILTV News. In an unexpected turn of events, the last living American hostage, Idan Alexander, is coming home. The deal accomplished by the Trump administration is giving the 21-year-old a second chance at life after he was held in deplorable conditions and in underground tunnels after he was kidnapped on October 7th. ILTV's Shosh Bedrosian is in Hostage Square, where thousands of people waited for his return home.
Emily, people have been here in Hostages Square all day long, just waiting for the release of the last living American hostage, Idan Alexander. He was 19 years old when he was kidnapped as a lone soldier serving alongside the Gaza border in the Golani unit. When he was kidnapped, he's now returning as a 21-year-old man, originally from Tenafly, New Jersey. He spent 2 birthdays while in Hamas captivity, and early this morning, his community in New Jersey rallying around him, waking up at the crack of dawn around 5 a.m. Just to make sure they can catch the release of their beloved resident where his family still lives. His mom and the rest of his family immediately jumped on planes when they heard the news Sunday night that he was coming home on Monday. Now, Idan Alexander is, like I said, the last living American hostage, but there's also 4 bodies of American hostages still in captivity at this time. One of them is Omer Nutra from Long Island. His family, of course, and the rest have been fighting to get their loved ones' bodies back home so they can close this emotional, horrific circle that they have been dragged into for some closure. Of course, there's a lot of things at stake here, but all of this was a complete surprise to his family. His mother, Yael, finding out on Mother's Day that her son was coming home today was a shock to them, as they've told media outlets. A complete shock. They had no idea that this deal was even being negotiated. Now, the sentiment and the feeling here in Hostages Square is that the families who still have their loved ones in captivity, they are pleading to President Donald Trump, his administration, Steve Witkoff, to get the rest of the 58 remaining hostages back home. They believe that they have the power to do so. They feel as if all of their trust is now in them after we've seen a ceasefire deal bring home more than 20 hostages stemming from the late January to February. They are hoping the rest of the hostages will also return back home, but a lot of emotions here in Hostages Square. Emily?
All right, thank you for that update. And now,
and an emotional and celebratory evening as the last living American hostage, Idan Alexander, reunites with his family after more than 580 days of Hamas captivity. ILTV's Shosh Bedrosian joins us from Hostage Square, where U.S. Special Envoy Steve Witkoff came through a few hours ago to meet with the rest of the family still waiting for their loved ones to come home.
Lidar, Special Envoy to the U.S., Steve Witkoff came to Hostages Square for a surprise visit. He was mobbed by Israeli citizens asking when the war will end, but he was also met with embraces by the families of hostages. So many families here believe that the Trump administration, including Steve Witkoff, will be the ones to bring home the rest of 58 hostages in Hamas captivity. Special Envoy to the U.S. Steve Witkoff enters Hostages Square in Tel Aviv, swarmed by people, including the families of hostages who embraced him. He also spoke to the family of American hostage Itai Chen, whose body is still being held by Hamas. Less than an hour before his visit, he met with released hostage Idan Alexander and his family, and said on X, President Donald Trump also spoke with them on the phone. Here's what he said about Idan today.
I think we all want to just take a moment to rejoice in what's happened today. Did you hear from Idan Alexander? What is he saying? Idan is surprisingly very strong.
21-year-old Idan Alexander is finally home after Hamas terrorists released him as a gesture to President Donald Trump. The last living American hostage, Alexander was released after almost 600 days in captivity. The first image of him emerged after his handover from Hamas to the Red Cross, where he was seen holding himself up in this photo next to a Red Cross representative and Hamas terrorist. Alexander was then taken to Rein military base, where he had an emotional reunion with his mother and father. Kidnapped at 19 years old, Alexander finally saw his brother and sister and still brought his light and funny personality his family had described for almost 2 years. He was then taken to the hospital for treatment, where he was then reunited with the rest of his family, including his grandmother, who fought tirelessly in Israel for his release. Alexander said he saw her while he was in captivity on TV. His hometown of Tenafly, New Jersey, also erupted in cheers once he was released. The lone IDF soldier was kidnapped while serving on the border of Gaza in the Golani Brigade when he was kidnapped by terrorists on October 7th. Initial testimony that's been reported so far since his release indicates his hands and feet were handcuffed for months, suffering extreme malnutrition, and had horrifying interrogations for weeks. In a statement released by the Alexander family, they say Idan will not be traveling to Qatar to meet with President Donald Trump. Instead, he will stay here in Israel and undergo medical treatments after his release from captivity. Meanwhile, the families of other hostages are hoping that this release is not just a one-off deal, that there is a plan going forward to release the rest of the 58 hostages, including bodies that are still being held by Hamas.
Thank you, Shosh.
Well, it's still too early to say with certainty, but early indications are that Israel killed Hamas military leader Mohammed Sinwar in a targeted airstrike in Gaza. Sinwar's potential demise would be the latest in a string of killings of top Hamas leaders and could dramatically impact the course of the war in Gaza and the fate of Israeli hostages. ILTV's Steve Leibowitz has the latest.
Estimates are rising that Hamas military leader Mohammed Sinwar was killed yesterday in a targeted IDF strike in Gaza. Sinwar was targeted in an airstrike that hit the Hamas underground command center below the European hospital in Khan Yunis. Jets dropped at least 9 bombs on the site, collapsing ground in the hospital compound. Palestinian officials say that 16 were killed and about 70 wounded in the strike, but no immediate word if Sinwar was among the casualties. That could take several days for local authorities to sift through the rubble and reach Sinwar and determine his fate. IDF intelligence says that if Sinwar was in the tunnel, as believed, he was likely killed. Mohammed Sinwar is the younger brother of former Hamas leader Yahya Sinwar and took over the military wing of Hamas after his brother and Mohammed Def were killed by Israel. The assassination attempt came as Israeli delegations for hostage and ceasefire talks arrived in Qatar, and Israeli officials said that Sinwar was the most extreme figure in terms of negotiations, and if he was indeed killed, it would make it easier to reach a deal. Shortly after the Israeli strike on the Hamas compound in Khan Yunis, the terrorists responded with rocket fire directed at Israel. Residents of southern Israel were forced to shelter when the Hamas terrorists fired 3 rockets toward Israel from Gaza. 2 of the projectiles were intercepted by air defense, while the 3rd fell harmlessly in an open area. There were no injuries.
And the IDF and the Mossad have recovered the body of missing IDF soldier Sergeant Major Tzvi Feldman in Syria after 43 years. Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu announced the recovery of the soldier this morning. Feldman fell in June 1982 in the First Lebanon War during the Battle of Sultan Yaakov and has been missing for decades. Sadly, his parents passed away, never giving up hope that their son would one day return. Netanyahu said that since the end of the First Lebanon War, Israel has not stopped in its efforts to try and locate and recover the bodies of the fallen soldiers. He added that Israel will continue its efforts to return the body of Sergeant Major Yehuda Katz, who is still missing. And after its agreement for a ceasefire with the United States, as promised, the Houthi rebels in Yemen continue firing rockets targeting Israel. IDF Arrow Air Defense shot down the Houthi missile on Friday afternoon that triggered sirens across central Israel. There were no damages or injuries reported. This was the 3rd attack directed at Israel since the Air Force launched airstrikes against Houthi targets, including Sana'a International Airport last week. Defense Minister Katz warned that Israel will respond to the latest Houthis attack and would respond strongly anywhere else needed. The missile was reportedly intercepted after the American THAAD system also engaged the missile but missed for the 2nd time this week. A week ago, a THAAD missed a Houthi missile and an Arrow interceptor malfunctioned, allowing the projectile to hit the grounds of Ben Gurion Airport, prompting Israel to launch 2 attacks on the Iran-backed group in Yemen.
Well, the Houthis are continuing to target Israel with ballistic missile fire. Some 1 million Israelis were forced to shelter last night and again this morning when missiles launched from Yemen activated red alerts across Jerusalem and central Israel. Ben Gurion Airport temporarily halted flights for a short time. This morning, the Houthis' ballistic missile was identified, triggering sirens across the Jerusalem area. The missile was shot down by air defense with no reports of injury or damages. Sirens were heard in Jerusalem and across the coastal plain. Last night's projectile was intercepted outside Israeli airspace using the Arrow air defense. The missile launches come amid continuing Houthi attacks on Israel in recent days, despite a ceasefire agreement between the Houthis and the United States. The Houthi latest attacks follow Israel's major strike on Sana'a airport at the beginning of last week, reportedly destroying much of the facility and causing some $500 million in damages. This after a Houthi missile landed in Ben Gurion Airport.
For more of the latest updates from Israel, make sure to subscribe to our newsletter at ILTV.tv or download the ILTV Plus app. That's it for ILTV's weekly review. Stay safe and see you next week.